Good morning, and thank you all for being here. I want to call this meeting to order. And I'm Nancy Corrigan. I'm a CPA, and I'm a member of the California Board of Accountancy, or CBA as we refer to it. I'm serving as chair for CBA's consideration of the CPA Experience Requirements Task Force. And I had to read that because it's a very long name, and that's why we call ourselves CERT, C-E-R-T. So welcome to the January 26, 2023 CERT Task Force meeting. And I'm going to mention CBA's policy for taking public comments for those attending in person here at the Sacramento office, or for those attending online via the WebEx platform. When we take public comments, we will begin by taking comments from those individuals here at the Sacramento office. And I will then ask the moderator to open the lines for public comment for those attending via WebEx. You will be allotted up to 5 minutes for a public comment. Now, I need to mention today that 2 CERT members, and that's Ms. Salazar and Mr. Dustin, will be participating remotely, and there are no mention of the public at their locations. So no attendance of the public at those 2 locations as they are attending remotely. I'm going to turn the meeting over for a moment to Ms. Rebecca Reed, our Board Relations Analyst, to take roll call and establish whether we have a quorum. Ms. Reed?
Nancy Corrigan.
Nancy Corrigan, present.
Dan Dustin.
Present.
Carrie Ann Farrell-Hines.
Present.
Kathy Johnson.
Present.
Katrina Salazar.
Present.
David Centeni.
Present.
Rich Samidian.
Present.
And Michael Williams.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. So I'm going to read the CBA's mission statement now that we know we have a quorum and we can continue forward. The CBA's mission is to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with established professional standards. This mission is derived from the statutory requirement that protection of the public should be the highest priority for the California Board of Accountancy in exercising its licensing, regulatory, and disciplinary functions. Whenever the protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. Moving on now to our agenda. For agenda item 1, you're looking for public comments for items not on the agenda. So for those here in the Sacramento office, is there anyone that needs to make a comment under agenda item 1? And seeing none, I will ask the moderator to check for those via WebEx.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen. If you're logged in and would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square, which is typically located bottom right corner of your WebEx screen, and type the word comment in the text field that appears, and make sure it goes to all panelists before clicking the send button. If you are calling in, you can participate by pressing *3 from your phone to raise your virtual hand. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please do. Proceeding on with agenda item 2, approval of the minutes of the September 15th, 2022 consideration of the CPA Experience Requirements Task Force meeting. Does anybody have any comments or questions, or may I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And that's a motion to approve for Mr. Centenian, and may I have a second for that? Second. And second, Ms. Hines, thank you. Any further discussion from any members of the task force? Seeing none. Are there any public comments from anyone here in Sacramento? I'm not seeing any. Moderator, would you please ask for those attending online?
Yes, this is the moderator. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. Press this question mark inside a square, type comment, send to all panelists, or if you're calling in, press *3 to raise your hand. No request. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Moving on to agenda item 3, discussion and possible action on a recommendation to the California Board of Accountancy. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I missed the vote. Ms. Reed, please call for the vote to approve those minutes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Nancy Corrigan, yes.
Dan Dustin,
And Dustin, yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Kathy Johnson,
Abstain. I was not here.
okay, Katrina Salazar,
Katrina Salazar. Yes.
David Centini,
Yes.
Rich Simidian,
Yes.
and Michael Williams. The motion passes.
Thank you. And now we are ready for agenda item 3, discussion and possible action on a recommendation to the California Board of Accountancy regarding whether the present attest experience requirement is sufficient to support the California Board of Accountancy's mission to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with professional standards. And presenting, we have Michelle Center, our licensing chief. Ms. Center?
Thank you, Chair Corrigan. Happy to be here. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide for a discussion and possible recommendation to the board on whether the current attest experience requirement is sufficient to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice accountancy in accordance with professional standards. As you may recall, at its November 21 meeting, the board directed CERT to use the following question as a guide to evaluate the experience requirements for CPA licensure. Is the present attest experience requirement, quote, necessary and sufficient to support the board mission to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with professional standards? At its September 2022 meeting, CERT made a recommendation to the board that the attest experience requirement is necessary. The board approved the recommendation at its November 2022 meeting. CERT must now address the sufficiency of the current attest experience requirement. The written item before you outlines the attest experience requirements. The important thing to remember is that it is not only a minimum of 500 hours of attest experience, but it also requires that supervisors opine as to whether the employee understands the various applicable professional standards that make up attest-related services. Gaining this specific experience to show an understanding of the applicable professional standards often takes more than 500 hours. At CERT's July 2022 meeting, the Qualifications Committee, or QC, provided feedback on the sufficiency of the attest experience requirement. Specifically, the QC advised that the attest experience requirement is sufficient. Some QC members noted that they believe it would be difficult to meet all of the attest experience requirements with only 500 hours of experience, but they also acknowledge that the current attest experience requirement is only one component within a system that includes QC review of work papers, peer review, and enforcement. According to the QC, this overall system ensures an adequate level of consumer protection. Additionally, the QC expressed concern with modifying the attest experience requirement as both firms and applicants are still learning how to complete the modified certificate of attest experience form. Feedback was also received from licensees on the sufficiency of the experience requirement. Surveys conducted in 2015 and 2022 indicated that the majority of the respondents who were experienced CPAs indicated that the board should maintain its current attest experience requirement. Staff agree with the QC and the majority of survey responses from CPAs that the current experience requirement is sufficient. The current approach used by staff to review each experience form and schedule applicants and our supervisors to appear before the QC as appropriate seems to provide a sufficient level of consumer protection. In conclusion, staff recommends that CERT make a motion to recommend to the board that the current attest experience requirement is sufficient for the protection of consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with professional standards. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Center. Task Force members, do we have any questions or comments regarding the presentation or the materials provided? Do I have a motion to?
I'm sorry, I do have a question.
I'm sorry, yes, Mr. Sensney.
Smithian, thank you.
Smithian, sorry.
My question related to, and I don't know if there was any feedback from the QC or if staff have a view on this, but the items identified or listed in terms of, I'll call them the qualitative components with regard to the minimum 500 hours. It goes through elements of completing an engagement, such as planning of the engagement, a comment about the variety of audited procedures, and I believe those are appropriate. But there were two items I had questions on. Item 4, which is included on, I don't see page numbers here, but included in that section, talks about experience in the preparation of written explanations and comments on the work performed and its findings. And that seems to be somewhat redundant, or at least embedded in item 3. I don't know if there was something intended to be separate in terms of the preparation of the work papers, but the preparation of written explanations, I don't know what that would be separate from preparing the audit work papers, so I wasn't quite sure if there was a need for clarity on that. And I guess the last one, item 5, and I think that in practice, this one's probably the most challenging here, is the experience in preparation of and reporting on full disclosure financial statements. You know, a lot of times in these audit engagements and the test engagements, the financial statements might be prepared by a member of management, and therefore there wouldn't be an opportunity to actually prepare the financial statements. I mean, there may be other things that are done around it, such as disclosure reviews and things of that nature, but generally that's not assigned to somebody with a limited level of, and even with, a multitude of 500 hours, it would be something that would be unlikely assigned to somebody at that early stages of their career. So I guess my question comes back to, was there any discussion with regard to whether all of these items would still be necessary, and with particular emphasis on the last 2 items?
I can respond to part of that as an auditor in the profession. As far as item 3, preparation of working papers in connection with various elements of item 1 and 2 above, and then 4, preparation of written explanations. Working paper can be a layout, an analysis. It can be cross-referenced to another section of the audit, developing a numeric result or the results of some analysis. And a written explanation can be a comment explaining, or in addition, the accountant preparing it did these additional procedures. So they can be very distinct. They really can. And as far as preparing and reporting on full disclosure financial statements, much of that is directed to 1 to 3 year personnel who have developed the information, developed the numbers, and especially I would say on some of these now automated systems and software that are being used, along with full disclosure financial statements, the footnotes, all of that being reviewed consecutively as it goes up the levels of those supervising. So that is much, and I don't know if someone else in public accounting, maybe, Mike, if you can add something to that, please, to help us here.
Yes, we on the QC committee, one of the things we look for is the gap checklists or various type of checklists for the full disclosure financials, and we find that those individuals are preparing those, and those are approved by supervisors. And when we discuss the financials with them, we walk through the balance sheet, the income statement, and disclosures to see if they have an understanding of that. And usually they say they prepared it because they've tied it out back to the work papers. So that's how we determine that for that particular 5.
I'm sorry.
Ms. Johnson, yes.
I was going to say, I still have the same question. I mean, in terms of the 1 to 3 year professional working in business and industry myself, they don't prepare full financial statements. And so I think maybe it's the language, because they do not have that experience within 1 to 3 years of actually preparing full financial statements. I mean, they work on pieces of it, but not preparing full financial statements.
Well, I believe it says reporting on full disclosure financial statements. So it's experience. It doesn't say they have to complete the entire part of that.
Okay, so reporting on those full disclosure financial statements.
Because we know that this whole process is there are a number of individuals involved, but when we talk to them, we look at the prep or the planning and then the issuance, and everyone does testing, right? Or those 2, 3, and 4. Usually, those people do that. But the planning portion and the preparation or of the full disclosures, we expect them to have some experience in that, even though they're probably not running it. Maybe because obviously a manager would probably be doing that. Does that make sense? Or?
Yeah, I think it was just the language that I was confused on a little bit.
So the key being participation with that client engagement. Mr. Smithian, was there something further?
Yeah, I just on that last point, I think your comment with regard to planning. I think the element of planning, which I think is included in that first item, and that's fairly broad, right? I mean, the engagement can be planned at the very senior level of the engagement with somebody with 5 to 10 years of experience, but there's still planning that might take place even as the engagement's going through, right? There may be sample selections, things like that. I think by extension, we can incorporate that into someone's level of understanding of planning. They might have participated in the planning meeting. They would participate in brainstorming sessions, things like that are a component of that. The preparation and reporting of financial statements is a little more narrow, and I interpret that as after the audit procedures have been performed, there's a section, the effort is really now capturing the information where you've gathered evidence and now either preparing, which can I come back to the point that in many cases that's not an audit function and would be done by management, and therefore there would be more of the review. So now we're looking at, particularly with larger firms and larger engagements, now you're looking at a situation where is it likely, probable that somebody in this and I'll use 1 to 3 years of experience, would play an active role, or any role, quite frankly, in the completion of a disclosure checklist. I'm not sure that's really happening. And if it's happening, it's going to create some other quality issues that you're not elevating something critical, I think, to the appropriate level with somebody with the right level of experience on the engagement. So it's kind of inconsistent with some other quality type of initiatives where you'd want the person with the right level of experience performing a pretty important function around that. So I know there's a lot of emphasis placed on that component and specific to that language because it is a little bit more narrow, I think, than the previous 4 items, and I'll leave it at that.
Any other comments? Yes, Ms. Hines.
To what extent is the opinion of the supervisor signing the attestation form required to include the level of experience of the person seeking the attestation experience? Because it seems like that might be something which would be captured in if it's a narrative opinion, or the opinion has a requirement that there be some level of detail to it, then it seems like then the opinion would say, this candidate this licensee has this level of experience with this area, but minimal, moderate, expert, or what have you. Is there any level of detail that might get to the quality issues that Mr. Smithian is referencing?
Mr. Williams, will you address that?
Sure. Well, the Form E has hours associated with it for each of these sections. And one of the things the staff does is they look at those hours, and if they're light, then that's when they may go to the QC, especially if they're light in the planning or the that. So it's not it's not qualitative. It's quantitative. It's hours, and I don't think there's really any room for the Form E for that type of high, moderate, or low, if that's what you're asking.
Mr. Franzella?
Thank you. When you complete the certificate of attest experience form, not only are the hours outlined at the bottom for these various categories, the supervisor does check off two other areas. For each category, checks off two areas related to each, and one is, did they perform these functions? Yes or no. And then there is that somewhat qualitative kind of outcome of, did they do it and understand it in accordance with professional standards, and they have to render a yes or no opinion. It's not graded in terms of like a performance standards per se, but they do have to attest to it. And when Mr. Williams and the QC sit down with these individuals as necessary, they probe that supervisor to make sure that he or she or they understand that form, understand what the expectation is, and that when they checked yes to that box, they appreciated what it meant, so that so if we need to have that one-on-one with them, we can assess that level of qualitative understanding on behalf of the firm and the signer. So I hope that answers the questions a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Franzella. Any other comments or discussion? Ms. Hines?
I'll follow up a little bit, because I think it is important for us to create the record that we are thinking about. We're making sure that we're, keeping the consumers, at, front of mind. I remember us having a discussion during, I think, our last meeting when we were, sort of talking about this a little bit, about the extent to which we rely upon the ethics of both the licensee that's seeking the attestation certification, as well as the supervisors that inherit implicit in the ethics, is that you are professing that what you're saying is actually true, and that you've given some level of consideration to it, and that you are putting forth this opinion, both as the supervisor, but also as the licensee, that you are able to do what you're saying you're able to do. And while there may be, room for error or misjudgment, we're presuming that ethically everyone is saying that they're able to do what they're saying they're able to do, and everyone is saying, by signing this, I attest that this person is able to do this. So that may cover some of the concern that you have, like, how do we really know that this person has actually gained this experience? But if the person is saying that they have a certain level of experience, and the supervisor that's signing the opinion is saying that they, trust that they have a certain level of experience, then, to what extent do we, trust that our rules of ethics then sort of close the gap on any concerns that we may have?
Ms. Hines. Mr. Smidian, please.
I keep saying my final comment, but but by way of example, maybe it's by way of example, and it wasn't necessarily from a qualitative standpoint. If somebody joins one of the larger firms and is working on public company work, not uncommon where they could be doing that for the first couple of years of their response as part of their job assignments. By definition, under the PCAOB standards, and those financial statements cannot be prepared by the firm, right? So the company would prepare those financial statements, and in many cases, the company, as part of their control process, would need to complete a disclosure checklist. And then at that point, that information is turned over to the audit team, and they have responsibility to review that work was performed to the satisfaction and meet those requirements. I think that process alone creates a barrier for candidates, particularly in those larger firms, in that environment, where they may not have an opportunity, not because they're not qualified, not because they're not doing everything they're asked to do professionally, but they're just not given the opportunity because of that, those other restrictions that are out there, where item 5 would happen with enough consistency and the availability for that to be available. So I think item 5, because of what I perceive to be more narrow than the other items, presents a barrier to effectively to candidates and ultimately to the consumers that there might be fewer candidates completing that within a reasonable period of time. And I think that's really my focus on item 5.
Thank you. Anything further, Ms. Hines?
I mean, but we are meeting to go through and make sure we're covering the issue. So are you then suggesting that one or more of those elements should be eliminated in order to ensure that that there are adequate candidates that are available to be able to receive the attestation certification?
Yeah, I don't know if I would eliminate it in totality, but whereas planning, as I described, is a process that involves a lot of different elements. There's a section within the standards that talks about audit wrap-up, and the financial statement preparation and the, disclosure checklist is part of this audit wrap-up phase. And there's a lot of ways individuals can participate in that section of the engagement, and it doesn't necessarily have to be as narrow as the preparation of audit financial statements. So at least consideration as to whether or not that item could be expanded to cover some other elements of the critical part of the audit process, but that audit wrap-up phase, it wouldn't necessarily just be the financial statements.
Thank you, Mr. Smitty. And the topic of pipeline, of course, is a huge one and well beyond what this task force is assigned to, but obviously one in a huge discussion nationwide, worldwide actually at this point. And being, I started in one of the big 8 at that time firms and went to a more local firm. I think we all understand that, in a very large firm, you could be assigned to a section, cash, accounts receivable, for 6 months or longer because the clients are huge. There is, it's common knowledge and has been for many, many years. It can take a long time to really gain that experience in a very large firm, not necessarily in more of the regionals or locals. So that's kind of an issue that's been ongoing for some time and something that I'm sure the profession will need to grapple with. Mr. Williams, anything else before we continue?
Yes, I had some comments. Mr. Franzella, thank you for that, expanding on the Form E, because you are correct. Secondly, during these QCs, when we're talking to the applicant and a representative from the firm, many times their billing systems don't line up with those 5, and so they don't complete them. They're like, oh no, we had well over 200 hours or something, not 30 hours. And so we educate them, and we find that's an issue. And lastly, I see what you're saying regarding, management prepares their financials and they're audited. That's the way it's supposed to be. So when they say preparation and reporting, maybe that is not worded. I think something like experience in the issuance of full disclosure financial statements may be broader and get to your point. I don't know, but I understand the way you read it. Yeah, they're not. Management has to,
Right, and I'm sorry, and they are not excited about accounting, right? Yeah, it's the wording, because they are not even issuance, because they're not. It's more of. I think you used terminology earlier to help me kind of understand. It's understanding the components of the income statement and the balance sheet. But between 1 to 3 years, they are not experienced that issuing, or it's utilizing terminology like that. I believe that could be confusing to the candidate, because then they're having to second guess what we're trying to get them to attest to.
Typically, we these people who appear before the committee are smaller firms, and they're not giant audits or whatnot. And if they're from a larger firm or a Big Four, it's foreign experience, So, but to your point, I understand.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further comments, I'm asking for a motion on staff's recommendation. Mr. Williams.
Can we repeat the recommendation again? I'm sorry.
Staff recommends that CERT make a motion to recommend to the board that the current attest experience requirement is sufficient for the protection of consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with professional standards.
Mr. Williams?
Yes, I recommend approval.
Okay, thank you. And may I have a second? Mr. Centini? Second? Very good. Any further discussion from the task force members at this point? I'm sorry, Ms. Johnson.
Are we going to revisit the language on that section? We just had the full discussion.
If the board directs us to, or directs the CPC, another committee to do that, yeah, you know, it's like a whole another project, you know, to do that. So I'm not saying it stops right here, but I'm just saying we have to kind of do what we've been charged to do and take it from there. Certainly a lot of clarifying needs to happen within. I understand all of that. Thank you. Any discussion from the public here in the Sacramento office? And seeing none, moderator, please check with those participating via WebEx.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you are logged in and would like to participate, click the question mark inside of the square, type comment in the text field, and send it to all panelists. If you're calling in, press *3 from your phone to raise your virtual hand. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please do. Ms. Reed, would you call for the vote?
Michael Williams,
Yes.
Rich Samidian,
Yes.
David Centini,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Kathy Johnson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Dan Dustin,
Yes.
and Nancy Corrigan.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you. So we will move on now to agenda item 4. This is discussion and possible action on a recommendation to the California Board of Accountancy regarding accounting firms' ability to provide attest services when the firm owners do not have the authority to sign reports on attest engagements. And we will have Dominic Franzella, our acting executive officer. Mr. Franzella?
Thank you, Chair Corrigan. So the purpose of this agenda item is to provide the CERT an opportunity to possibly offer a recommendation to the CBA regarding accounting firms providing attest services when the firm owners do not have the authority to sign reports on attest engagements. Prior to establishing the CERT, the CBA did have discussions on this topic and even took some initial actions to increase consumer protection surrounding these issues. As noted in the background section on the bottom of page 1 and then carrying on to the top of page 2 of the item, these included first an increased notification both to the client and to the peer reviewer during the peer review process, and second, increasing professional responsibility through enforcement actions. But due to various issues regarding a test and general experience requirement, the CBA paused completing these actions and obviously established this task force to kind of delve into the topic of experience for licensure. With the CERT having recommended the attest experience requirement is necessary, and the CBA having accepted that recommendation, CERT obviously has been pivoting now to reviewing various other policy issues that were before the CBA and that the CBA asked CERT to perform some review on. So as it relates to this particular topic, the CERT will need to consider any potential additional recommendations beyond those outlined in the background section, if any. If the CERT believes the actions taken by the board appear sufficient, then there's really no further action the CERT needs to take or possibly offer any recommendation to the board. But if there are other recommendations it wishes to explore and eventually provide to the CBA, then it can request staff to prepare future items around this topic for its consideration. With that, I'll turn it back over to the chair, and I'll do my best to answer members' questions.
Thank you, Mr. Franzella. Any questions or comments, discussion from the task force members? Do we have any other ideas that might be considered in addition to what we already have here in the materials? Ms. Hines?
I just have a question about the extent to which this is mentioned in any kind of educational, continuing education or, about that test requirements as another means of, disseminating this information.
Response to that, do we have some knowledge of that, Mr. Franzella?
If it's specific to this particular niche topic in a way, I don't know of any necessarily. And there really aren't a ton of obligations at this point around this, which is part of the actions the board took a while ago, has since paused, and we'll be reinitiating to kind of create more of guardrails around this area, so that I presume then CE providers will start adapting their materials to kind of address this particular issue, and especially if it becomes more prominent as well. I'm not sure how often this occurs, but we have seen more of it. It's still probably a very small area, but my guess is it'll be expanding over time, and this is the board trying to, kind of get in front of it again.
You, anything else from the task force members? Yes, Mr. Smidian?
Just so I'm clear, the issue is that you have owners, I guess partners of a CPA firm, and they have all of the partners, and maybe the sole partner has a G license, but they hire someone who's a non-equity owner to perform a test services. And is that the kind of the structure, I guess, that's in question on this topic? Is that?
Mr. Franzella?
Thank you. Yes, it really is more along the lines. I don't think the signer has to be an owner per se. In the circumstances we've come across, it's usually it's been a single shareholder corporation, and they have an employee who has an attest license and is therefore authorized to sign attest reports, and they then authorize that individual on behalf of the firm to sign.
Thank you. Anything else from task force members?
Just one final question. So
yes,
in that scenario, are they signing the report as the individual licensee, or the firm name would appear on that? Okay, so an answer is yes. So and just one other point of clarification, were the recommendations that were discussed previously, I think you mentioned notification to the peer reviewer, or maybe it's notification to the client, were those implemented, or was that something that was tabled at this point? Have any of those been operationalized at all?
Mr. Franzella?
So there is presently a code section regulation, I believe it's 50.1, that requires some level of disclosure to the clients about the fact that ownership doesn't have the experience, the authorization, I won't say the experience, but the authorization to sign the report. And it can be accomplished in one of two ways. The recommendation that the board had evaluated and again tabled, none of these have been implemented beyond that original one that I think took place back in 2008, was to modify that notification requirement to make it more explicit and more direct for the client. And then on the peer reviewer side, same thing. That's not been implemented. We will go through again, if there's no other recommendations from here, we'll go back to the board, present that language again, reinitiate.
Mr. Franzella, that proposed amendment, section 50.1 is our attachment 2 in our materials, correct? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments from task force members?
This is Kathy.
Yes, Ms. Johnson?
I would just say I would definitely agree with that amendment. I have heard, we hear there's a problem. This could be a larger problem going forward, given the retirement of seasoned CPAs and newer people coming in with less experience than the more seasoned CPAs could be reporting to non-equity owners that do not have the attest license. And so I would definitely recommend that notification be explicit so that anybody finding themselves in that situation understand the significance of what both the licensee and the consumer.
You. And so are you willing to go a step further and make that part of a motion so that it's included as part of the communication and outreach plans and other ways to get that information out there as staff have recommended?
Yes, I am.
And do I have a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
Ms. Hines, thank you. Any further discussion from the task force members on this item? Any comments from the public attending here in Sacramento? And moderator, would you check for any comments from those attending online via WebEx?
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. Click the question mark inside of the square, type comments, send it to all panelists, or if you're calling in, press *3 to raise your virtual hand. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please do. Ms. Reed, would you call for the vote?
Kathy Johnson,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
David Centini,
Yes.
Rich Semidian,
Yes.
Michael Williams,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
Dan Dustin,
Yes.
and Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you. And now moving on to agenda item 5. This is a discussion and possible action on a recommendation to the California Board of Accountancy regarding how licensees who are accounting firm owners obtain experience to convert to a license with a test authority. We will have Ms. Center, our licensing chief. Ms. Center.
Thank you, Chair Corrigan. The purpose of this agenda item will be to provide you with an opportunity for discussion or recommendation to the board regarding how accounting firm owners who obtained a CPA license with general experience can gain the necessary experience to convert their license to have the authority to sign on attest engagements. At its November 2022 meeting, the board adopted CERT's recommendation regarding the necessity of the attest experience. With the board's adoption of this recommendation, the CERT has been asked to focus on the additional policy issues raised by the board, including the discussion of a path for accounting firm owners with a general license to obtain the necessary experience to convert their license to one with the attest designation. There has been a decrease in the percentage of CPAs with a test authority from 100% in 2001, when all licensees had a test authority, to 57% of the current active population of CPAs. Additionally, there has been a decrease in the number of CPA initial licensees approved with a test authority from 1,385 in 2010-11 to 913 in 2021-22. Therefore, there may be a need for action to address this shift. Addressing the barrier that exists for firm owners who want to convert their license type could increase the number of licensees with a test authority and therefore increase consumer choice. The board receives approximately 100 conversion applications annually. However, these applications do not come from accounting firm owners due to the barrier that exists for them to obtain experience. The CBA regularly receives required inquiries, or sometimes applications, from CPAs who are accounting firm owners with a general license, asking if there is a path to convert their license to one with a test authority. Currently, no path exists, as an accounting firm owner is unable to obtain qualifying attest experience. In order for a test experience to qualify, the applicant's supervisor shall have reviewed and evaluated the qualifying work on a routine and reoccurring basis and shall have authority and oversight over the applicant. This model centers on employer-employee relationship and does not account for firm owners. The CBA did not contemplate the need to allow for firm owners to convert their general license to one with a test authority. CERT is being asked to consider and make possible recommendations on how to allow firm owners to obtain a test experience. Staff have provided 2 options for consideration. However, staff do not have a recommendation and ask CERT to consider all possibilities. The first option would be for a firm owner to enter into an agreement with another accounting firm or another CPA to obtain the necessary oversight. The parties would need to draft an agreement that creates a supervisory structure that meets the CBA's requirements for supervision. Another option would be to discuss modifications to the definition of supervisor that would allow a firm's employees to supervise the owner's attest experience and meet the board's requirements. CERT would need to consider how to adjust the concept of oversight and authority and potentially issues regarding the perception of undue influence employers may have over their employees when the roles are reversed. That concludes my presentation. Chair Corrigan, I can turn the discussion over to you, or I have prepared some guiding questions. I can go through them.
Ms. Center, let's see first if the task force members have any comments or questions about what you have already presented, and then we can proceed. Task force members, Ms. Hines.
Yeah, so I appreciated that the suggestions were given, but I did feel like, so can we get some opinions about either of these recommendations? I assume that because they were presented, they're viable and, they're considered like, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, maybe your guiding questions will answer that. Then maybe we should go with the guiding questions first.
I think the guiding questions will. I will say that the options were put in there as options. Staff have not done a considerable amount of work on the options presented, and they do have, I will say, concern regarding changing the definition of what is a supervisor.
I want to add first, and then we will go through that I believe with that, having an employee being able to supervise an employer could have many unintended consequences that we probably haven't even thought about or can't even think about at this point. I'm not sure. I think that's one great big ball of yarn that would, so that's my opinion on that one and my thoughts on that one. I see Ms. Johnson has her hand up. Yes?
I just wanted to add that I concur with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So if there's nothing else at the moment, we will have Ms. Center please continue.
Thank you. So I have prepared 3 questions to help us navigate this topic. It's a large topic. So the plan would be I'd ask each question and then pause and get some feedback on each of the specific questions that we have. And then if there is any consensus on any of those questions, we can rephrase that at the end to determine if that might be able to be worded into any type of recommendation or motion. Okay? So the first one is there agreement that there is an issue? Or in other words, does CERT agree that G licensee firm owners need a specific pathway to obtain a test experience that would allow them to convert to a license with a test authority?
Members, do we concur that this is an issue and a pathway that should probably be provided to those G licensees? Mr. Smithian?
Can you just clarify, I may follow, but is this happening a lot? I mean, you said there's 100 in the request, but was that inclusive, or does that represent the number of firm owners that were doing that, or was that just in total people who were converting from G?
It does not represent that because they are not eligible now to submit an application. Really, so all we know is that we frequently do receive emails and calls regarding this, and so we know it is an area of concern.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Johnson.
I can see the need of a firm owner, someone who originally attained a G, quote unquote, license and later on decides that they do want to get into attestation. So I would agree that there should be some type of a pathway to make that happen.
Thank you. Ms. Hines?
And I think our previous discussion on some of these other issues have indicated that we do have a concern about the pool, the diminishing pool of qualified licensees that have this experience. So we've expressed both in this committee and I think in the wider CPA that this is an issue. We just don't know how to, address it. But
Thank you, and I would agree with that as well. Anything else from any other task force members on this item? So it sounds like we're in agreement. Would you like to proceed, Ms. Sender?
The next question I have, and this will be a little more difficult. That was the easy one. Yeah. Are there any ways that an A licensee, sorry, I got my letters wrong. Are there any ways that a G licensee firm owner might get a test experience that you find acceptable or particularly not acceptable? For example, I have heard one, which is having an employee provide that supervisory oversight. I heard that may not be acceptable. So, for example, what are your thoughts on potentially an MOU or some other type of agreement? And we had in here with one of their own staff, which I think we all said, many of you said, no, or with someone outside of their firm who is an A licensee.
Any thought, Ms. Johnson?
Just a question. Could you clarify what you mean by MOU?
The MOU is really just an example of what type of legal agreement might be needed. I think that the language that you might recommend could say an agreement such as an MOU, potentially an MOU, or we could phrase it as just an agreement with the idea that this is some kind of written agreement where they are describing the oversight function that they would have.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, I mean, I believe that CPA firms, especially the smaller to mid-sized firms, could partner and have some type of agreement where the experience could be obtained by partnering on certain engagements. I know that I partnered with a partner at a firm who was asking, the client was asking for someone who had a CFF license, who was certified in financial forensics, and that firm partner did not. So I believe those types of relationships do exist in this area. So I believe that is a viable way of making that happen.
Thank you. And I want to, I'll just go on to say, too, that on page 2 of 3 in the comments, or that the options, that we would need a model, as staff have recommended, a framework, so that there is a defined pathway to make this happen, so that everything is met, the parties offering that oversight understand, and the party receiving the oversight, the experience understands, so that they're meeting that common goal of converting from a G license to an A license. So it would have to be fairly defined, and staff could go to work doing that if that's what is recommended and if that is what the board directs. Anything further? I'm sorry, Mr. Williams, yes.
Yes, I like the memo of understanding. I think it could develop a template, and that shows accountability, as opposed to working, not with some kind of a standard document, and then it outlines it, and then people who are signing that document, the attest person probably is going to be more accountable.
Thank you. Mr. Franzella? Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Dustin, your hand is raised. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for recognizing me. I agree with the direction of the conversation. However, I would suggest that we also have to consider the impact that professional liability has on the willingness of individuals to participate in the program in that manner, and perhaps, what the professional liability insurance companies may view as potential liability or risk for the people who are providing that service. I think it's the right direction, but I think there are risks that we have to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are excellent comments and observations, and certainly it's not an easy situation to deal with, but certainly would be nice to provide the pathway if that's what we come to. Mr. Franzel, I think you had something to add.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to mention that we actually use a similar model already to some extent in a disciplinary proceeding with supervised practice, and that it doesn't have a memo of understanding necessarily, but there are general expectations. Staff can go back and review kind of what happens in that environment to then, offer some suggestions to the board if that's what ultimately is recommended here that we want to create. We think the board should establish a pathway, a model, and it should include certain the box in a particular way. Staff can go back and kind of navigate that, but we do use this in some form or fashion today already. So hopefully we have some of that information to kind of start with.
Thank you, Mr. Franzella. And yes, Mr. Smidian.
Yeah, I think there's enough evidence where there's subject matter specialist type of arrangements and things where if a firm doesn't necessarily have the requisite skill set or experience in a particular area where they would work with another firm. So I think I think that happens with a high level of frequency and in a very collegiate, collaborative sort of way. I don't know if I've seen it as often, at least in my experience in areas of a test, but I think you'd have to have the proper, safeguards as you talked about the contractual arrangements. But and I don't know if we want to get into the extent of what that would look like, but I would think it would need to be a fairly robust, similar to what we just talked about in terms of the qualitative elements of that Form E. It would have to be at least and then some because of maybe there's some familiarity and other issues that you'd have to try to overcome. And you're dealing with somebody with 2 years of experience and saying you haven't quite reached that level of experience yet versus somebody who might have been the profession performing non-attest services for 15 years, there could be undue pressure to say, okay, after one engagement, they're in a position to do that. So I know we're not going to debate the extent of that, but I think that's something that needs to be fairly robust as it's developed. But I do think that model is preferable than the employee-employer role reversal thing, which I think is problematic.
Thank you. And within the materials, it's clear, and if that's what we're working toward, a framework, a model. And so we're not just streamlining something like here's a quick shot to becoming an A licensee. It would be robust. And I believe I have Ms. Hines first and then Mr. Centini.
I wanted to ask whether we would change the qualifications of the requirements in this situation that would be different from someone who was pursuing this, as a new licensee. Because in the past we've talked about the sufficiency and necessity. I think we were contemplating it for someone who is new to the practice, but this is we're talking about. You were referring to someone who is experienced already in the accountancy practice and they're looking to add. So would we hold them to the same requirements, or would this framework maybe include some different considerations that would come into play, which then also might get to some of the issues about how do you create that, that relationship, that partnership?
I don't think staff have really given that a lot of consideration, but my guess, at least at an onset, would be it would be that minimum. That we would create a consistency because, yes, they may have 15 years of experience in non-attest services, but almost they might have not even done any type of attest, anything since studying in a school. or being tested in the CPA exam. So you're going to treat them in a similar vein as they were a new licensee and have them meet that same, I guess, floor is probably the expectation. I would say the other thing that as the committee kind of looks at it, aside from the MOU, other steps that could be considered is, especially during the development and first implementation of this kind of structure, pathway, model, however you want to phrase it, is requirements that they go to the qualifications committee every time, so that there's this kind of initial check of, okay, is this working out in accordance with the board's expectations were, and assessing and making changes. I mean, you can't make immediate changes out of it, but you can make changes over time. But it gives it an extra element of quality control by utilizing the QC to kind of vet this for the board concurrently. So those are layers that you can add on to this kind of concept. So I just thought.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Centini?
When I hear this, am I thinking the same as everybody else? We're talking about with a template. We're talking about a helpful kind of thing to facilitate people to achieve the A license. And this is one pathway, but others are acceptable. So we're not trying to be restrictive, really, but establish one pathway, kind of like a minimum, but others are also possible. Is that?
Well, it is not to restrict anything, but really to open up the opportunity for a G licensee owner to accomplish and become an A and open up, the depth of services that they can provide. And so that's what we're talking about, definitely. Anything else from Mr. Williams?
I was just going to comment on I would say that the requirements for certification would be the same for anybody else. And so this would just be guidance and a template so that person has a pathway, but they would not do anything less than anybody else would be expected to be certified for attest.
I agree that it needs to be just as rigid because, as Mr. Pranzella mentioned, we don't really know at that time what is their past experience. You still have to demonstrate the ability, demonstrate that experience and steps for those. Anything else before we continue on with Ms. Center? Okay, moving along. Ms. Center?
Okay, the last question that I have, are there any characteristics that the attest experience approver might need besides having an A license? For example, independence in their judgment, having recent experience, having a certain number of years of experience. Are there any particular characteristics that you think might be important that we include in any future model pathway?
Thank you. Those are all really good thoughts. Ms. Johnson.
That's a very good question because when we're talking about owners, they can have different levels of experience, as we were just discussing. Some of them may have worked extensively in internal auditing, which utilizes many of the same skill sets and qualifications, or financial analysis. So if they have had lots of experience in financial analysis, they may be even more experienced or qualified than a 1 to 3 year person who has gotten that A license. So I believe that's a really good question and something to really think about as we think about creating that framework.
Thank you. Any others? Mr. Williams.
I would agree that can help, and I think that we have the Form E and things, from doing internal audit. If you're independent and things like that, there's some things like working papers, but obviously you can't issue an opinion on financial statement. But I think that that's something in that guidance that could be included, as well as working for an attest person.
Anyone else? Task force members? Yes, Mr. Smidian.
I'm not sure I really have a real basis for this, but I think it would be preferable if the approving CPA is an equity owner in their firm. That was their partner level person, that it would be at the appropriate level within their own firm to at least equivalent to the firm that's being reviewed if that makes sense. So I think that just goes to the issues I alluded to earlier, is just kind of the authority, the ability to deal with those types of questions. So I think that level of experience would be helpful, because this is going to be a new situation or new to even the most experienced partners. I think it would be helpful, as opposed to being like a manager level person who might have had that met that requirement.
Ms. Williams, or Ms. Johnson, sorry.
I would agree with Mr. Samidian on that. I believe there's a different level of responsibility that comes with being an equity owner, and I would just concur with his comments.
Good, thank you. And should we recommend this in going forward, and I know Ms. Center is now going to bring us back full circle, remembering that this is something what staff would work diligently on, as they work diligently on everything that they do. They would probably be presenting it to the CPC, who would then work it through. And so, you know, before it becomes official, et cetera, and it's a ways off, but it could be a very workable and excellent model and framework that would consider everything that we're saying. So, Ms. Center, shall we continue?
Yes. So I have attempted, if you could just see this paper with chicken scratch all over it, I have attempted to capture what I believe is a summary of what I heard. So I'm going to provide that back to you. I'm doing so in a way that I think you may be able to entertain it as a recommendation. So it would be that the CERT supports a pathway that would allow GU licensees who are firm owners to obtain the necessary experience that would allow them to convert their license to one with a test authority. The CERT supports the consideration of a pathway that includes a written signed agreement with an A licensee outside of their firm to provide for subject matter expertise and an oversight relationship. The CERT supports that the pathway address certain characteristics that the approver of the experience should have, including having an A license and being an equity owner in their own firm, and having independence in their judgment regarding the firm owner's satisfactory completion of the attest experience.
Thank you, Ms. Center. Does that seem to be a summary of what we discussed? That really does. So would someone make a motion to that effect? Ms. Johnson?
So moved.
Have a second? Oh, Mr. Dustin, your hand is raised.
Thank you, Chair Corrigan. I've heard a couple things discussed, and there's a little bit of conflict, I think, on what I'm hearing, because there was discussion about a pathway for those employed in business and industry to become licensed. But if you have a qualifier that the person has to be an equity owner of the firm, I don't know if that could possibly exist in B&I unless you're hiring somebody from a firm or agreeing with somebody from an accounting firm to do that. One of the other things that comes to mind, if we're saying that the person who's going to enter in this agreement is going to be from public accounting, you might want to consider that that person's firm has undergone peer review successfully as one of the qualifiers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I apologize. I thought perhaps you were going to second the motion that was on the table, but it was actually further discussion that we'll consider. And I first want to see, Ms. Salazar, do you have further discussion before we continue with the motions?
Since I believe we need a second, I would happily second the motion and then like to make a comment if it pleases the chair.
I guess my question right now is, do we need to amend the first for anything that Mr. Dustin provided? What?
May I comment first?
And I'm sorry, who's speaking right now?
Thank you.
Ms. Salazar. Okay. Yes, please.
I would just ask the question. I have a little bit of a concern about the equity owner, because I do want to contemplate, as our population of CPAs changes and does different things and maybe moves into semi-retirement, that we're not excluding those really qualified people who may no longer be equity owners. And so I would ask staff to comment on maybe, we have a lot of peer reviewers. Are they all equity partners in a firm? Or do we allow peer reviewers to be individuals who are maybe sole proprietors? And so I would just ask that maybe we not be overly restrictive. I think by equity owner, we're referring to the level of experience and knowledge, but rather than picking an entity, I would want to focus on those attributes that we're trying to get and maybe respectfully put that back to the committee for comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Salazar. Yes, both points well taken. And peer reviewers can be manager level. They just have to have like a number of years of experience and qualifications, et cetera, and in some cases specialties. So we have a couple of comments in addition to, and so what I will put back to you, Task Force, is do we want to revise our motion to include, yes, so Ms. Sender, is there a way to maybe re-summarize for us? We know what the motion is.
Would that be okay if I just re-summarize in a way that tries to address the two things I heard?
Please do.
And we'll see if that gets us here. I'm going to just read the whole thing over again, if that's okay. Supports a pathway that would allow G licensees who are firm owners to obtain the necessary experience that would allow them to convert their license to one with a test authority. Supports the consideration of a pathway that includes a written signed agreement with a licensee outside of their firm to provide for subject matter expertise and an oversight relationship. The CERT supports that the pathway address certain characteristics that the approver of the experience should have, including having an A licensee and being a highly qualified subject matter expert, such as a partner or peer reviewer. Additionally, the approver should have had a successful peer review completion, which is what I heard from Dan Dustin, and have independence in their judgment regarding the firm owner's satisfactory completion of the attest experience.
Thank you, Ms. Center. Now, Ms. Johnson, do you want to modify your motion to encompass the revised summary?
Yes, I do. The motion is to be modified. Thank you.
Thank you. And may I have a second? Oh, Ms. Salazar seconded, but I guess you're still our second, given the revised summary. Yes? Very good. I have my second. I appreciate that. Thank you. Members of the task force, is there any further discussion before I take public comment? Ms. Hines.
I want to confirm that we're sending back to the staff to go out and to pursue this path and just recommending that there are minimum things that we want to see in it, but we want to generate discussion and then hope to see back to us some additional recommendations after staff consideration and potentially sending it back to the sending this to the CPCs. That I just want to confirm that's what we're talking about. This is a broad scope that then we'll get back more information.
Thank you. Mr. Franzella?
Yes, thank you. So yes, this recommendation would in essence give that the CERT would be creating kind of the box a little bit, things that might want to be in that box, and then that'll go to the board tomorrow. The board will presumably adopt that recommendation, and then it'll become a board topic, and we'll explore it at the CPC or wherever President Salazar believes it's appropriately examined, and it'll get fleshed out in more detail.
Okay. Good. So now we've had our comments from the task force after our first and our second. I need to know whether we have any comments from the public here in the Sacramento office. Seeing that there are none, moderator, would you please open it up for those online via WebEx?
Yes, this is a moderator. The Q&A feature is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you're logged in and would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square, type comment, and send it to all panelists. If you called in, press *3 to raise your virtual hand. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please do. Ms. Reed, would you call for the vote?
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Kathy Johnson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Dan Dustin,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
Michael Williams,
Yes.
Rich Semidian,
Yes.
and David Centini.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Center. So we are ready now to move on to agenda item 6. We're really working hard in this task force today, I have to say. This is discussion and possible action on recommendation to the California Board of Accountancy regarding reciprocity issued under Business and Professions Code Section 5087. We will have Ms. Center, our licensing chief, present, please.
Thank you. The purpose of this agenda item is to serve as your opportunity to discuss and possibly recommend to the board regarding reciprocity licensure in California, specifically with a test authority. Business and Professions Code, or BPC, I may call it that later. Section 5087 provides a statutory mechanism for waiving the uniform CPA exam and issuing a license based on an applicant having an active and unrestricted license in another jurisdiction. This code section requires that an applicant who wishes to be licensed with the authority to sign on attest engagements meet the attest experience requirements found in Code Section 5095. Section 5095 establishes the 500-hour minimum for a test experience for licensure with a test authority. The board implemented Section 5087 and sought to address the attest experience requirements found in 5095 through regulations, specifically Section 36.1 of the California Code of Regulations. These regulations require that out-of-state licensees who apply for licensure in California demonstrate that they are authorized to provide a test of services in another state. Currently, only 2 other jurisdictions explicitly require a test experience to sign on a test engagement. Most states issue license with only general accounting experience. As currently implemented, an applicant who possesses a current, active, and unrestricted license in another state for 4 of the last 10 years and is authorized by that state to sign on and test engagements is eligible to be licensed in California with a test authority. Under the current implementation of these regulations, the possibility exists that a licensee seeking a license under reciprocity could have a license issued with the authority to sign on and test engagements without a test experience or having not engaged in a test functions recently. The CERT may want to consider making a recommendation to the board regarding if the CBA should continue implementing reciprocity as I just described, and or the CERT may want to consider making a recommendation to the board that Regulation Section 36.1 be amended to more clearly define the attest experience requirements for those seeking reciprocity. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Center. Task Force members, any questions or comments regarding the information presented? Ms. Hines?
Doesn't this, if we don't provide some clarification, doesn't this open up a path for licensees to do an end around on our attestation requirements, qualifications?
Mr. Franzella?
The way this is implemented now is kind of subject to discretion. So at present moment, an individual who has a license in another state who is therefore authorized, but maybe has never done a test work, could apply here and obtain that A license without having demonstrated the attest experience, yes. In the past, it was implemented differently. where they would have to demonstrate some level of experience, whether through some self-certification or a listing of their engagements. But that process changed at some point. But I think what we're kind of seeking from CERT is whether or not there should be a recommendation to the board to more clearly define that and not have such ambiguity in the regulation.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Ms. Johnson?
Yeah, and I apologize. I missed the last meeting and maybe this was discussed. But in these states where, you know, the requirements such as what we have here in California is not required, these licensed professionals are still expected to follow NASBA's guiding principles of enforcement. Am I correct in that discussion?
Mr. Franzella?
I'm not really, yes, the states do follow the guiding principles of enforcement. I'm not sure where the interplay is for this, in as much as the individual is applying, they have a license from, let's say, Arizona, and they're authorized to sign a test of reports in Arizona regardless of having done a test work. They can apply here and obtain that attest license in California.
Okay, because I think here is my concern back with, if we are requiring, like you said, it may have to be on the individual basis, but if we're requiring certain things of California's licensees to perform a test work, and those same requirements are not required of someone who was licensed in Texas. I was licensed in Texas. I don't have the 500 hours. I never performed a test work because of NASBA's, guidelines. I didn't do that. So I think if anyone getting reciprocity here in California is allowed to circumvent the rules that we're implementing for licensees here in the state of California, it's a disadvantage to California CPAs. And it circumvents the reasons why we are requiring those attest requirements for licensees here in California to protect the public.
Certainly, thank you. And that might be, given the change in environment, that we need clarification of our terms and our requirements exactly so that they can be followed. Anything further from task force members? Ms. Hines?
Are we looking for a motion to?
As soon as I know there are no other comments, except that I do see Ms. Salazar's hand raised, so she has a comment. Ms. Salazar?
Thank you for that, Chair Corrigan. One of the things I think as a comment I would make is I'd like to see our staff maybe submit, work on a project where they look at whether or not we can close that gap between our fears and what that candidate or that applicant has done in their home state. And so I would suggest that maybe there could be some sort of self-certification that really makes them go through that exercise to say, do I have the experience that California requires? And it puts it front of mind. So that's a suggestion, and that would be what I would maybe ask to have staff develop as maybe a way to add some clarity, protect the consumers in California better, and maybe give our board the information that they need without, creating new barriers to out-of-state licensees.
Certainly, thank you. Ms. Hines?
It sounds like we need a motion.
It sounds like I thought you were in the middle of ready to start a motion, so I'm ready for your motion.
Before I do, is this a motion that needs to come back to the CERT, or we can go to the CPA? So then I would make a motion that the CBA request a report from staff regarding how CCR Section 36.1 can be amended to more clearly define the reciprocity requirements when it comes to attestation.
Thank you. And do I have a second from one of the members? Ms. Johnson?
I will second that.
Thank you. Any further discussion from task force members?
I'm open to a more artful articulation of the motion if that's
Do we
necessary.
have I believe, do you believe, Mr. Franzella, that covered what we're trying to accomplish here along with Ms. Salazar's comments?
Yeah, that last part that you added about the attest summed it up.
Very good. So so we have a first and a second. I get lost because these are complicated topics. We have no further discussion from task force members that I can see. Do we have any comments or discussion from those attending from the public here at the Sacramento office? And I'm not seeing any. Moderator, would you please ask that of anybody participating online?
Yes, this is the moderator. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click the question mark inside of the square, type comment, send it to all panelists, or if you're calling in, press *3 to raise your hand. No requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please. Thank you. Ms. Reed, would you call for the vote?
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Kathy Johnson,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
David Centini,
Yes.
Rich Samidian,
Yes.
Michael Williams,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
and Dan Dustin.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. On to agenda item 7. This is a discussion and possible action on a recommendation to the California Board of Accountancy regarding options for addressing possible consumer confusion between CPA licensees who maintain licenses with or without the authority to sign reports on attest engagements. And we have Ms. Carrie O'Connor, our Deputy Enforcement Chief. Ms. O'Connor?
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Carrie O'Connor, and I am the Deputy Enforcement Chief. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide the CERT an opportunity to provide a recommendation to the California Board of Accountancy regarding addressing a possible consumer confusion between CPA licensees who maintain licenses with or without the authority to sign reports on attest engagements. Prior to the current CERT discussions regarding this topic, in 2013, the Taskforce to Examine Experience for CPA Licensure, also known as TEAL, reviewed this topic at its meeting in July 2013. As a result of those discussions, revisions were made to 3 areas of the CBA website that a consumer would access to review information regarding the authorized practice of a CPA. Those sections were the how to select a CPA, California license lookup feature, and the consumer assistant booklet. The revisions specifically included clarifying information to ensure that consumers understood the difference between attest and general experience, specifically that an individual licensed with a test authority is simply that, authorized to sign reports on attest engagements, and that having an A in the experience completed column does not mean that the individual is necessarily qualified or actively practicing in that area. Staff suggests that the CBA incorporate this topic to address possible consumer confusion into various outreach items as part of the CBA's outreach and communication plan. Staff value any feedback that the CERT may wish to provide that will add clarity to consumers, thereby increasing consumer protection. At this time, I would like to turn the discussion back over to Chair Corrigan and would be happy to answer any member questions, feedback, or suggestions regarding this item.
Thank you for that presentation. And task force members, do we have any other suggestions for staff to consider on this topic that might be helpful for this endeavor? Ms. Johnson?
I don't really have any specific suggestions, but I am aware that there is great confusion. There's confusion over the A license and G license, and now we're trying to inform the public about the differences of an A license. You can do this and you can't do that. There is lots of confusion, even among professionals who rely upon the CPA brand in the litigation area. I have had questions relating to A license and G license on the stand in the courtroom. So I would agree that there is great confusion out there, and we need to figure out some way to help the public understand the differences. A lot of CPAs still don't understand the differences as well.
Thank you. I concur with all of that. Do you have any other ideas? I mean, podcasts on the topic, and I think some are already maybe on the website, but the difference between an A and a G, how to select a qualified CPA depending on what you need. I mean, things like that can come from this task force, and then the staff can kind of take it forward. Anything else from the task force members that we would like the staff to hear? Noah? Oh, yes, Ms. Johnson.
I would just say I would add on how to select a qualified CPA. I think starting with the basics is very, very important, even for CPAs.
Yeah, definitely. And defining the types of services. Exactly. Taking it from either direction. Kinds of CPAs we have the two kinds, the kinds of services that they provide. Anything informative like that, it's almost like too much information cannot be too much information ever, in a way. So anything else from task force members? And just suggestions. We're not necessarily looking for an action on this item, but recommendations, suggestions, any discussion that we might have.
Yeah, I don't know if this is much of a consumer awareness, but yeah, I think you might start with at least include faculty, students. I mean, there's a great deal of confusion just through that environment. As a adjunct faculty member, I get questions all the time from other faculty, seasoned faculty members, on this very topic, and it's coming initially obviously from students and applicants as to what would be needed. So I think even that might help, at least for the pool of applicants.
Definitely, thank you. Even third-party users, banks, bonding companies, I don't know whether they are clear now or they are not, but I know for a long time they have not been. So it's kind of like everybody at each end of the spectrum, we need to get that communication out there. Anything else, task force members? Any other suggestions? Seeing none. Any comments from the public here at Sacramento? And I don't see any comments. Oh, yes, Mr. Aguilera.
Hi, Doug Aguilera, CPA. And I think that a simple graphic would be nice. 2 columns, A, G, and a few bullet points under each, which could be on a web page, on a handout, anyplace else.
Excellent. Anything that is simple communication to clarify any confusion would be helpful. And seeing that there's nothing else from the public here in the Sacramento office, moderator, would you check with those participating online via WebEx?
Yes, the Q&A is now open. Instructions on the screen. Press question mark, type comment, send to panelists, or press *3 to raise your virtual hand from your phone. No requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please. Thank you. Agenda item 8 is agenda items for future consideration of the CPA experience requirements task force or CERT meetings. And what I want to offer here is that pretty much the items that we have completed now, we are making recommendations to the board, and at the board's direction, we would continue with anything else they might request. And I'm just wanting to leave agenda item 8 at that point, or, unless any of you have anything else to say, but that's kind of where we are at this point. So, and if there is nothing else, I thank you. This was a very robust meeting with many helpful thoughts all the way around, and I am ready to adjourn this meeting. Thank you.